live from the Capri Campers mobile podcast studio and community development center. This is the Small Truck Campers podcast, where we aim to build community, share inspiration, and encourage others. We got a lot of great things to cover out in this episode, so why don't you grab your favorite campfire beverage and let's hit the road. Welcome to the Small Truck Campers podcast. So thrilled y'all are joining me. We have an awesome conversation lined up with Matt Igoe, the founder and creator of Afuera Coffee, something I've been drinking now for the past month and absolutely love. I've had a lot of questions about coffee, about where it comes from, about different sources, about how it's produced. I don't know. There's so many cool things we dive into because coffee is such a sacred tradition and a sacred moment here in the Small Truck Campers world, whether you are making some coffee before you go hit the slopes or you're about to go surf, and having that sunrise experience with a nice warm cup of coffee is something I think we can all relate to. So I'm super thrilled to get that conversation going here in a second. Matthew talks about all of his experiences with coffee, different types of coffee, what makes coffee great, what makes it poor, and super thrilled to be jumping into that conversation here in a second. I'm recording this podcast from the Small Truck Campers mobile podcast studio and community development center. This is our Capri camper, our cowboy model. It's a perfect little non-cab over camper. It's insulated, it's warm, it's got amazing craftsmanship, and I'm just so thrilled to be recording this podcast in essentially a soundproof unit in the back of my truck that is the Capri camper. This thing is great. I love the quilted sides. I love the craftsmanship, like I said, the durability and the simplicity. I've had a ton of campers. I've had pop-ups. I've had non-pop-ups. I've had big hard-sided. I've had small hard-sided. And I think my favorite thing about this thing is just it's ready to roll. You don't need to fill up the water tanks. You don't need to empty the black water when you're done using it. It's got a battery that powers everything with an inverter. I'm able to record this podcast, and I'm super thrilled to be bringing this podcast in the Capri Camper podcast studio. So without any further ado, let's get into episode 30 with my guest, Matthew Igoe from Afuera Coffee. All right, so I got Matthew Igoe calling in from El Salvador. Matthew, thanks so much for joining me on the Small Truck Campers podcast, and thanks for fueling this episode with Afuera Coffee.
Yeah.
I'm stoked to be drinking the Sunrise Sessions Dark Roast, so thank you.
Thank you for having us, or me, I should say.
I'm excited to chat about coffee and your story and our audience, all that stuff. So we'll just get into it. I first hit you up a few months ago, just connecting on the outdoor kind of path where you guys are on. But curious to know kind of your upbringing, where you grew up, how you got into the outdoors, and we'll start there.
Yeah. I grew up in Connecticut, right on the Long Island Sound, just outside of New York City. So my dad was a finance guy, and I grew up there fishing on the Long Island Sound and really around the Montauk area, which is, for us Northeasterners, is probably one of the more famous, saltwater fisheries. Got an awesome inshore bite, and then obviously offshore is incredible as well. So grew up there, and I relocated to San Salvador now almost 4 years ago, once things opened up after the pandemic.
That's awesome. In Connecticut, if I recall, like Block Island Sound, that looks out to Long Island, correct?
Yeah.
Like Montauk area?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So striped bass is like, the game fish for us at home. I started a striped bass tournament when I really got into fishing with my buddies around the Long Island Sound area, which kind of got bigger than I anticipated in a short period of time, which was awesome. And then you quickly realize the conservation factor kind of start hitting at, I guess, a relatively young age, because, we watched it disappear sort of in front of us. And what happens when you implement regulations, how it can recover. So it was interesting. Seeing it as a kid, I guess probably not really realizing it firsthand while I was a kid, but definitely, I think planted the seed for sure.
Because you're enjoying the outdoors, and you saw it kind of diminish before your eyes over your course of your time out there. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, 100%. And listen, it gets better in other fisheries and other times and places, right? But the striped bass specifically took a major whack, and is still really recovering. And there's a lot of debate about, creating, making the striped bass a game fish, and really, really, really restricting, you know, creel limits and what people can catch and more importantly, what they keep. And so, yeah, there's a debate because, it goes state by state where we are, right? And alone, you've got Rhode Island, you've got Maine, you've got Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. Everybody's got their 2 cents. And as you know, those states alone, they're loud people. So,
So what when you were fishing, like how did you get into fly fishing?
it's interesting. My dad, we grew up going to a place called Ocean Reef Club, which was a club down in Key Largo. And my dad got introduced to fly fishing there. And I was still young. I was more like the shrimp in a bucket kind of kid and go like fish the bridges and the docks and stuff. And then I guess in my sort of late 20s, I picked up a fly rod for in the Long Island Sound. Really fun in the fall for striped bass and bluefish. You know, all blind casting, not really having any idea what I was doing, but got certainly into it. And very, very little stream fishing, although it's really good by us. I've done it a handful of times, gotten decent at it, but like definitely room for improvement there. And then I tell you, I went sight fishing for striped bass up in Long Island in Shinnecock Inlet area, and I was hooked. I mean, it was one of these things that I grew up fishing for these fish my whole life blindly and maybe sometimes on the surface, but this was, poling in really skinny water, a foot or two, three, and having multiple shots in a day at fish you could see 80 feet away. And it's, the guy that I fished with was like, yeah, it's like gin clear water. And I'm like, bullshit, no way. But it was. I mean, and it's crazy. You can go 100 yards and it's not that crystal clear, but it was spectacular and definitely I've been pretty hooked since.
Wow. Yeah. I've heard I've never fly fished. I want to get into it. But what is the feeling of you get hooking a fish on a fly versus like a normal rod and reel? What makes it that much better?
I mean, I guess that's the thing, and maybe that's why I hadn't been like overly, uh, into it. And when I was a kid, is because I was blind casting, which to me would almost be like the same as throwing a lure or a popper or something like that, right? But when you actually see something 30 or 40 feet away and you need to throw at it and you watch it turn whatever direction it's going to go eat whatever you just threw at it is a wild experience. And it happens here in El Salvador offshore, right? It's the Pacific
Wow.
Ocean here. So, you go troll in the Pacific and you get in this like really blue, purpley water and it's, mahi mahis and the sailfish get crazy around there that they're right next to your boat, right? And same thing, you throw a fly in there and, you watch these giant fish eat it in front of your face. I think that is where the hype factor gets so big.
That's amazing. Sounds like almost like hunting, a little bit of hunting instinct, fishing,
Yeah.
water. It's kind of encapsulates a lot of exciting things. How did you end up in El Salvador? I want to hear that story.
Yeah. So it certainly goes back. I went to boarding school in Rhode Island. And, at that time, there was like a heavy influence of Latin American men specifically. And it used to be an all boys school. So maybe that's why. And I met a bunch of buddies that were El Salvadorian, Nicaraguan, that, became my lifelong friends. And I was at one of my buddies' weddings in Nicaragua, which is where I met my wife. And I was working at that point in corporate America in New York City. And I met her at this, ridiculously cool place in Nicaragua. And, you blink your eyeballs and like you're on a bus heading to the airport, right? Like, oh man, I don't know if I'm ever going to see her again. Right. And, we ended up connecting, and a couple months later, we met and we did the long distance thing for about a year and a half or so. And then she moved to New York to live there with me, or Connecticut. And we did almost like 7 or 8 years there, 9 years there. And then we moved to El Salvador once the doors opened after the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah.
And were you able to work remote and support yourself down there, or I think there's a lot going on there. I feel like a lot of people would be hesitant to make such a drastic
Yeah.
move.
I was.
I get from New York. What was the allure to get down there? Obviously, your wife was from Central America. She probably wanted to be home, but like, what was the allure?
Yeah.
Why El Salvador? Why not
Yeah.
just stay up in New England?
It's a great question. I mean, I guess I'll back it up a little bit. I worked in corporate America, and, I still work full time in the media business. And I had gotten connected through an old college friend to a guy who owns most of the poker rights and the poker that you see on TV today. And he's based in Vegas. And I had an opportunity to start working for him now almost 10 years ago. And he gave me the first glimpse of what remote work was like. I thought I was going to be working in corporate America for the rest of my life. It was just sort of like what I was trained to do. I was in, Connecticut. My kid was supposed to go to the good little like Connecticut schools. And then I got this taste of working from home, which was great. And I was able to be with my son, who was, at that point, I quit when he was, man, not even a year. So like I had his first 4 or 5 years, I was home, which was great. Right. But I also realized that, like, I think my wife maybe wasn't as happy in Connecticut. Right. Sure. It was great being near New York, and we had a good group of friends and whatnot. The seasons were cool, but I didn't realize what she was missing until, we came down here. Right. And we came down here to visit once the airports opened after COVID. We lived at a hotel at the beach, which was pretty awesome because at that point, like, every other seat on planes were still empty. Shit. Every other row on planes were still empty. It was still, most restaurants had bubbles over the tables. It was still like early post COVID days. So we were living at the beach, and my work was still fully remote, but no one was really playing poker. We weren't streaming any stuff on television, so we were at this sort of lull, which, immediately made me realize, like, wow, it's different here, right? The
Yeah.
people are different. My wife was immediately like happy because she was with family and friends, but the people are extremely welcoming. No one asks what you do for work, right? Which in Connecticut, that's the first thing they ask, what you do, right? no one could care less, which I thought was mind boggling. And so, yeah, we came for a couple months, and then we decided to enroll my son into school for a year. And then, we've still been here. And I basically commute back and forth to the US for work. And it's been awesome. The guy that I work with also allows me to do this coffee business, which is a side hustle and passion project and something to keep the wheels going. Right. And it's, I feel lucky to be working with him and to also be able to have the ability to do this, project on the side.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful. So you're down there, you're working still for the poker business. So tell me how you got interested in coffee and why coffee and how you kind of tie that into, fishing and the outdoors and just kind of explain that whole process because it
Yeah.
is amazingly delicious coffee.
Awesome. I'm stoked you love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've always crushed coffee. Always just been a big coffee drinker, right?
In New York.
Yeah, totally. And it was the like staple of every part of my routine. If I was getting on the train to New York, coffee, right? If I was meet my boys to go fishing, coffees, right? And so it was like that was always a big part of what I did. And my brother-in-law actually owns a coffee farm. So, while I was still living in Connecticut, I started trying to like import some coffee, extremely unsuccessfully, but I tried, right? And in doing so, I did find a roaster in Connecticut that was willing to kind of show me the ropes a little bit in terms of like, hey, you know what? Like, you can get coffee from anywhere in the world. And, you know, maybe it's not your brother in law's coffee, maybe it's mine, but, if you have an idea, maybe I can help you bring it to fruition. Right. And it was still that at that point, right? Like an idea. I'd love to figure out something in coffee. I got to the point of names and stuff, but nothing crazy. I knew I wanted it to be something like first light or morning light because so much happens at that beginning time in the morning, right? But like, I guess the missing piece was still the coffee. And then, you know, my brother-in-law actually introduced me to the guy I'm working with now, whose family owns multiple farms across El Salvador. And more importantly, we directly ship from those farms to a warehouse and roaster in the US. So
Got
it
it.
was an opportunity for me to tap into a specialty coffee, which and all this other sustainability factors that I can get into in a sec. But B, it allowed me to tap into an operation in the US where I have access to a roaster, a pick, pack, and ship facility. I had everything at my fingertips, right? So, it was a matter of like business economics, right? And talking with the guys and forming a partnership, which we did. And so yeah, we I love it. And I feel like this piece of meeting this guy was a major factor, right? And wanting to make some sort of difference and I never knew how. And, this was like, all right, perfect. Here's how I can do it.
Yeah, and I love your respect to, like, the morning, like you said, first light or, like, the early morning, the dawn. I feel like no matter what you're into, that's when, like, the sacred hour is for, like, fishing, for snowboarding, for surfing, for any activity. It's like that ambition and that, excitement to get up before the sun breaks. like you said, have the coffee in hand, brew it, and kind of think about like what lies ahead in the day, and capturing that like excitement
Totally.
is really, I can relate to that a ton. So it's really cool to hear your kind of, yeah, your take on that, or your excitement about those morning hours, which is obviously reflected in your coffee, like with names like sunrise sessions, morning gratitude, etc.
It's funny you say that
Uh,
because we wanted to call it morning light or first light. And my dad's friend, who ironically was like an IP copyright attorney guy, was like, listen, just Googling that, I see 9,000 first light this or morning light or that or cafe this. And he drew a circle and he was like, hey, imagine this is the globe, right? Your brand needs to be like out here, right? And and we were thinking like, okay, well, what is the first light, morning light, outside, something outside with light, and it's like, all right, well, we hit Afuera, and I was like, okay, well, that means outside. That's outdoors. And it is. You hit the nail on the head. That morning time, whether it's with my wife, and my dogs at 5:30 in the morning, or if it's with my buddies and like getting ready to go out and like that adventure, that time is just like, it's incredible.
yeah,
Yeah.
agreed, 100% agreed. Talk to me about what it means to be Rainforest Alliance certified, and also your sustainability approach to packaging, giving 5% back, and your philanthropy side of the whole
Yeah.
business.
Yeah, totally.
Philanthropy.
Yeah. So uh basically we would do these beach cleanups here in El Salvador because after the tides would change, there would be so much trash on the beach, right? And to me, it was like, okay, like that's a problem. And so figuring out sort of eco-friendly products and materials was goal number one, right? And that's what is in a lot of our costs. We source the best materials we can and the most eco-friendly materials we can in order to try and preserve Mother Earth, because while we may not see it in Connecticut or in beautiful California, you see a lot of it in El Salvador, right? Trash, plastic, and no disrespect to my competitors or any other brands, but so many people talk about it and they say how much they do it. And then you look at their packaging and it's like the worst plastic in the world, but they care about removing plastic, right? And it's like, this doesn't make any sense now. So, that's always been in the core of our business. And then partnering with these farms, being sustainable, being rainforest aligned, right? Like, what does that mean? Essentially, what it means is that they have frogs and species in this farm that are unique and indigenous to this area. They're part of like the small little tropical rainforest of El Salvador that's here. And it's preserved by this farm, by all the trees and habitat that this farm offers. What I think a lot of people don't realize is sometimes they'll ask, like, oh, is it shade grown coffee versus sun grown, right? Well, if you think about what that means, is these are coffee trees and plants that are throughout the entire farm, but covered by other natural trees, right? They get the sunlight when they get the sunlight. And, you know, compared to bulldozing everything down, maximizing your space, trying to turn your crop over 3 or 4 times a year because it's sunny all day long, it's like, it's not the way to do it, right? And what that also does is it preserves animals and frogs and other things that would otherwise be wiped out if you tried to maximize your profits on these farms, right? So to me, it was something that I didn't even know until I got into. And you start walking around, you're like, oh my God. And you're in a couple square acres of this beautiful tropical area. And I'm not saying you're seeing the frogs all over the place and the birds and whatnot, but if you knock it down, you won't see them, right? So that's why. And then, the shade grown factor of that, I don't want to be working with people that will knock trees down, kill all the birds and everything that are part of that ecosystem in order to grow more coffee. Right. So that whole sustainable factor, the fact that we can go and tap the farmer that is plucking the cherries off the tree's shoulder is something that I would say most coffee companies can't say they can do. Right. And when I say we source the best we can do, we are sourcing the best that we can source in terms of eco-friendly materials. Right. And we're still a ways away, but in terms of like, I think technology and whatnot in that world, but I I still find it amazing how many brands that say how much they support kicking plastic, but yet their bags are all plastic or their K cups are plastic or whatever the case is.
So, what makes your guys' packaging different on that note? Because I feel like, yeah, like you said, a lot of people are tricked and there's a lot of greenwashing. And it's interesting to hear about the Rainforest Alliance certified. That's a huge factor that I'm going to now play into when I look at coffee at the grocery store. But what would you say is like the norm for packaging, and what do you guys do for
Yeah.
to get this at our
Well, just to back up really quick about the rainforest thing while I'm thinking about it. It's, this is a small country, man. And you drive
yeah
around it and you see it's flat in a lot of areas. And, it's because they grow a lot of sugar and they grow a lot of other things. It's a great agriculture country. But, our neighbors, Costa Rica, and like the wildlife that they have there is mind-bogglingly more diverse than what we have here for that sole reason, man, because like they have the resources that, are so limited here. Right. So like
yeah
to be able to support those farms and whatnot, I think is awesome because, again, it's not all about the money. Right. And the packaging, same thing. Right. It's 100% compostable bags, and we're in the process of resourcing and redesigning our bags for a multitude of reasons, which I can get into. But why is because, again, I want to make a difference, right? The plastic that many of the coffee companies use are is so bad. It's what ends up in the oceans. It's what ends up in the woods. It does not compost. It doesn't do anything, right? And you want to know why? Because they're cheap, right? And you can go source them in China for like a tenth of the cost of our bags, maybe a 20th, maybe a 50th. I don't know. But like our bags are expensive for that reason. We source them in the States from, companies that we believe in that source, eco-friendly materials. Same things with our mailers, same thing with our labels. If it's not, something that can be compostable, it's plastic that's recyclable. It's plastic that's been recycled. It's whatever we can do that, just shows that we care and that we're credible to our brand, right?
yeah that's that's wonderful. It's really cool to hear that take on it too. I've never been exposed to that kind of harsh truth. When you do get your coffee beans, there's probably a footprint of unsustainability that got onto your doorstep. So it's cool to hear that is your passion. And like you said, it's not as profitable, it's not as easy, but long term, you can sleep well at night knowing that you're contributing to the solution, not the problem.
I mean, listen, like many people say, like, if you look at our coffee and you say, wow, it's $25 or $26, depending if you subscribe or not. to have coffee shipped to my door, right? And they say, whoa, that seems like it's really expensive. And you're like, well, okay, well, let's talk through this for a second, right? Like, you're getting specialty coffee, which means it's, in the 5 percentile of what's imported in the US. You're drinking the best of the best beans that you can import, right? From sustainable farms, directly from a farm to your cup, right? And then you get into the material factor. You're getting a bag that you can compost. The others you strictly can't, right? And we give 5% gross, right? Which again, I mean, you don't have to be an economist to figure that out, but read the fine print on a lot of these other brands that say they give 3%. They give 3% a net, right? So like you can net out, a lot less than you can gross, depending on your margins, right? So like, to me, this is our first deduction when on our expenses, right? It's like, okay, charity 5%. So to me, it's a matter of all of that stuff, doing it right and being authentic to it, right? And that's how I want to work with people. I think that's how I found someone like yourself, right? Is like, I'm no bullshit. I'm not big. I hope one day we are, but we're trying, and we don't say we're doing this and then, do the opposite, or say we're all about kicking plastic and then go make nickel or 10-cent bags because we make more money.
So when someone's getting like at the grocery store, they're looking at, a bag of your coffee versus like a jar of Folgers that is like $8 for the big old metal tin.
Yeah,
What are they getting in that metal tin of Folgers? We went through what you're getting, but just for like contrasting or comparison.
sure. Well, I mean, again, I'm not a buyer for them, but coffee is done on a grading scale, right? So generally, the higher the grade, the higher the altitude of the coffee. And if you think about a mountain or a volcano, it's like a triangle, right? So you can imagine the amount that you gross out of the top crop versus the bottom crop is a lot less. Thus, like, you're getting better beans, they get better climate, light, whatever the case may be. And I'm not a farmer, but then what they do is they blend them, right? All of our coffees that you're drinking are like single origin. They come from the farm, they go to your cup, right? These guys many will have a bean from this farm, and then they'll have a bunch of beans from another farm in Ethiopia, and we'll have some beans in Brazil, and they'll just make this like crazy blend of wherever they can get like the cheapest beans, right? So, you know, for example, everybody says like, wow, the commodity of coffee has gone up so much in the last 24 months, right? To record prices. Well, for me, when you're dealing in a commodity within a commodity, right? Like the finite bit of the coffee commodity, there is no market. Their market doesn't really fluctuate because there's not enough of it, right? For me, like our prices don't really vary because like there's only so much you can get. So you're already paying to get the better quality and the best of what you can get. And like that won't change. That won't fluctuate. If Brazil has some drought or some crazy rainy season, that won't affect anyone, like, but in a general coffee world, that will, right? Because, they buy the bottom third in mass, right?
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. I've learned a ton
Yeah.
about coffee and where it comes from and what you guys all about. And I'm really happy that we got to chat about all that. What's your favorite way to enjoy some Afuera coffee?
Great
French press,
question.
pour over,
Great
espresso
question.
machine.
I've a couple different things. I first started all on French press. I was like all about it. Then I got one of these travel like aero presses, and
Yeah.
dude, that thing was awesome. And so now I just got the XL AeroPress, which I'm a big fan of. And I have one of the Vessel Outdoors. They make this rad outdoor coffee brewing stuff, and they have a great pour over. So I like it all,
Oh,
man. But I think gun to my head, I'd probably go with the AeroPress, man. It's easy and like the convenience. Like I'm heading to Florida for a couple days to go fishing with some guys that we work with in Afuera, and hopefully get some cool content. I'm like, you throw this thing in your backpack with a couple of those sample bags, and like you're rocking.
yeah.
Yeah,
And then the AeroPress is cool. It's definitely got a long history with like cycling and kind of on the go activities because it
totally.
is super easy and it does make an amazing cup of coffee. I'm rocking the French press right now,
Yep.
but I enjoy anything, man. The pour over, the little espresso machine on the little stovetop,
I like those too.
and
I actually,
yeah,
I got one of these things called an Outin. Outin. It's Outin, and it's this like mini espresso machine. And
cool.
plug it in on USB if you can, like if you have a kettle and can do like boiling water, hot heated water, you don't need to use the battery as much, but it pours a great like little espresso, a cup of espresso. So I'm with you, man. I really love it all. I will say that I've gone from a cream like half and half to like with like 3 sugar in the raws guy to
Yeah,
black with maybe like a hint of sugar. And I enjoy a black cup of coffee now. You really do get the flavor. Um, I also learned from these like shows that I've done, the fly fishing shows, you get these guys, give me your darkest, strongest stuff. And you're like, well, actually, it's the lightest, strongest stuff, right? And they're like, what are you
yeah,
talking about, man? They're like, well, when the dark is like bird, right? And, and the caffeine is out of it. So you're drinking sure, it's dark. You get a robust flavor, but the strong is really in your light roast. And they're like, you got to be kidding me. You blow people's minds away with that, right? It's crazy.
no, totally.
So,
Yeah. And that point, yeah, I just had this without any creamer, and I'm kind of a little bit of half and half or a tiny bit
yeah,
of heavy cream. But this dark roast sunrise sessions, I didn't eat anything, and just being aware of what people are putting in their coffee with the creamers and all the chemicals and stuff. It's nice just to be able to enjoy a smooth
it's true, man.
smooth cup of coffee. I'm stoked that you're fueling all the adventures we got going on here in the community, and can't thank you enough for the support. If people want to learn more about Afuera, what's the easiest way to get some more info? What's the website and
Yeah.
Instagram?
Afueracoffee.com. You can do outsideinspanish.com because some people don't know how to spell afuera.
Got it.
Afuera Coffee on Instagram. I'm Matt at afueracoffee.com if you want to write me an email. Spencer, listen, man, like you reached out to me blindly on Instagram. We're happy to like fuel your adventures and your podcast and everything. We appreciate the content that you share with us. And listen, man, this is what we're all about, right? Like, I want to meet people like you in communities. I want to support your rendezvous, your meetups, and obviously we're in these things because we want to make a difference. We want to be successful. No one wants to like be unsuccessful in these things, but I'm not in it to do like, as I told you early on, to, spend a bunch of money on Facebook and ads and try to become this massive e-commerce brand. I'm trying to like get really good coffee into the people that are enjoying those mornings like we talked about, right?
Appreciate that. Yeah. Well, thanks for the kind words, and it was awesome hearing about your background and your experiences and how you kind of tied it all in with this amazing coffee brand. And I'm stoked that you're hooking up the listeners too with code Small Truck Campers at checkout to receive 10% off. And I'll link all of the stuff below. So if you're listening or you're watching the podcast right now, you can check below and enjoy a bag of coffee at 10% off. So Matthew, thanks again, man. It was great chat. I'm happy we got to connect finally with
Absolutely.
kids and
Yeah.
hemispheres and all that. We made it happen, and looking forward to bringing this coffee to some of our community members and events this year, and couldn't be more thrilled about Afuera's support. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And happy to support you in the community. And again, if you need anything, reach out to me, man. I mean that sincerely to you, your followers, everybody, man. We're open. We got no egos. We're trying to learn and navigate the way. So we want feedback, input, etc. So stoked to be working together, man.
Perfect. Same. All
Awesome.
right. Well, we'll stay in touch, and yeah, we're excited for 2025, new packaging and all that stuff. So thanks, and we'll
Appreciate you.
chat soon.
Awesome. Thanks, man.